I'll take a moment to introduce myself and Natalie. My name is Adrienne Simeone. I am the founder and president of the Mama Bear Effect. I started the Mama Bear Effect in September of 2012, which we're just coming up on a full 11 years of doing this work, which is very exciting. It's a great milestone. Some of you may have even known us since the very beginning, which is always really cool. I started this work in response to what I saw was a lack of information and resources for all people to learn about the issues of child sexual abuse. Amy, it's good to see that you're here. Thank you so much for joining. At that time, 11 years ago, there really wasn't a comprehensive place for someone to learn about all the issues of child sexual abuse. And I just want to come out and say we are a survivor-led organization. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And for me personally, it was just something that I thought was an isolated incident that only happened to me, that I wasn't allowed to talk to other people about, that people wouldn't understand. And it wasn't really until I became a parent myself, and then I learned how prevalent this issue is, that I really became spurred to take more of an active interest in this issue. I have a background in marketing and entrepreneurship. Child sexual abuse prevention is not just an issue that needs to be addressed by the professionals that research these issues or deal with the therapy and the first responding. It's also a psychological issue for our society at large. And if we want to prevent this issue, we need to engage and raise awareness and really encourage people to take action. And that's something that we're going to talk about today in our presentation, is about that kind of missing piece of how are we going to engage families and caregivers to help protect children from sexual abuse, and what's holding us back. So that's my introduction. I'm going to start off, but I will let Natalie introduce herself and give yourself a brief biography about your work and how you came here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here, and it makes me happy to see in the chat all of these people from all over the US and even somebody in South Africa. So really cool to be here with you guys. So yeah, my name's Natalie. I have been working for Mama Bear Effect for about 2 years. Before that, I had experience working at a crisis center and at a child advocacy center. My main thing that I really like doing is research. I think it's really important, and it's what helps us make change. And so that's what's led me to Mama Bear Effect, is the research that I did in my master's on female sex offenders. And it just led me to Mama Bear Effect because it's important to also focus on prevention awareness so that we can prevent more of what's happening. So yeah, I'm happy to be here today.
All right, well, we're going to kick it right off. I'm going to share my screen so we can share the slides with you. One second. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. Okay. Okay, so today the focus of our presentation is to give you some background education on the issues of child sexual abuse, but also focus in on our work regarding parents. And just so you know, I have a full screen going on. So Natalie, if there's anything coming through in the comments, please just let me know, or feel free to respond if it's something that you can respond to individually. But so, you know, today we want to talk about a public health approach to child sexual abuse prevention, what that is, and why we're really focused on parents. So just to kind of, you know, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background, you know, in terms of the issues of child sexual abuse. It certainly isn't something that is a new phenomenon. It's been going on most likely since the beginning of time. And, you know, historically, if you go back into the research, you can absolutely go back into the ancient Greek and Roman time, where, you know, young girls were sold into marriages. You know, boys were encouraged to have sexual relationships with adult men as part of their growing up process. And there was just this whole, you'll see it throughout various cultures of how they dealt with what they called hysteria, which was, you know, women who had emotional instability. And there were a lot of, you know, things that they thought were causing it, whether it was witchcraft or whatever else. But, when you get to Sigmund Freud, in his research, he really dug into what was causing female hysteria. And this was the result of actually a big cover up that came of it, which there's a lot of ambiguity as to what exactly was covered up and what he believed and what he had discovered. But so in his work, he had interviewed numerous women who were from wealthy families and suffered from what they were calling hysteria at the time. And what he found in his research was that the vast majority of these women were being sexually abused, most often by their fathers. And when he came out publicly saying that sexual abuse was directly correlated to hysteria, there was a big backlash. And it was mostly from the professional community. And he very quickly changed course on his statement. And instead of saying that it was sexual abuse that these women were experiencing, it was rather that these women fantasized about having sexual relations with their fathers, and that these were dreams or just figments of their imagination that they were disclosing. Now, of course, we can most likely assume that that was not true, that society very much probably did not want to acknowledge the existence of child sexual abuse, especially incest, especially that it was being perpetrated by wealthy, well-connected families. So unfortunately, for a very long time, the issues of child sexual abuse became, rather covered up. And I love this quote from Bessel van der Kolk, because, he thought, he was told by the experts, by all his research and training that he went through to become a therapist, that incest was extremely rare. And yet he had 47 women come into his own personal practice to disclose this to him. So, the 1960s, 70s, 80s, we really started opening our eyes a little bit as a society to understand the issues of child sexual abuse. And for anyone that's familiar with the Playboy Sugar and Spice magazine that came out in the 1970s that featured Brooke Shields as a 10-year-old girl posing nude in a commercially distributed and sold magazine. Child pornography, as they called it at the time, was completely legal until 1977. And it wasn't until 1984, when a father was arguing that it was his First Amendment right to take sexual photos of his own daughter, that it became illegal to possess images of child sexual abuse. So, we've had, it's been a gradual process. 1991, the Center for Disease Control finally acknowledged that, child sexual abuse was an issue, creating the Division of Violence Prevention, taking steps to prevent this issue. In the 1980s, there was really a strong uptick of research on the issues of child sexual abuse. And for a long time, that was the data that a lot of people were relying on to understand the issues of child sexual abuse. But it was becoming more and more prevalent in the research that people were disclosing that they had experienced sexual abuse, but these numbers were not correlating to what was being reported to the police and the authorities. And so that's really one of the big challenges about this issue, is that it's hidden. It's very challenging for survivors to come out and make disclosures, and oftentimes by the time they do, they are well into adulthood by the time they make those disclosures. So for me personally, when we're talking about statistics and research, it's always important, if we're going to reference something, to know where that statistic came from and how that data was compiled, because there are statistics of information about what's reported to the authorities, and then there will be statistics of what's reported in a private anonymous study. So it's really important to understand the distinctions between where some of that research comes from, because it can absolutely sway the information and the data. If you go by reports of sexual abuse reported to the authorities, you're going to have more stranger danger type situations reported. And so for a long time, they said, 90% of abusers are people known to the child. But if you go by reports in anonymous studies, that number climbs up to like 96, 97%. The vast, vast majority of people perpetrating sexual abuse are people known to the child. So just to kind of give you some perspective here, I know, over the years, there's been a lot of focus on sexual assault on college campuses, because obviously that's a really serious problem. But if you look at this statistic here that shows, and this is, I believe, reported to the authorities, this is the rate of victims. And the most dangerous time in a young woman's life to experience sexual assault is actually not in college. It's around the age of 14. So we really have a serious problem from what I can see in terms of the level of awareness that we have in our society about the issues. Because I would say, from me personally, before diving into all of this work and falling down the rabbit hole, is that I would have thought that college was the most dangerous time in a woman's life. You're out and about, you have independence, you're surrounded by other people, and yet here we have children who are living at home, who are in a very vulnerable age, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, that are experiencing the highest rate of sexual abuse in all of adulthood. So I think that's really telling us in terms of the awareness that this issue is really getting on a societal level. And to push this a little further, because that last report was from the year 2000. So this is from 2013, 2014. Again, we see that girls between the age of 14 to 15 are extremely vulnerable to sexual abuse. And this is by peer sexual assault at school. So it's even a peer-to-peer issue. It's a child to adult issue. And also, from what we can tell from data from the most recent 5 years, as social media and children's access to smart devices and stuff, it has only gotten worse. Children continue to be very vulnerable, and it seems to only heighten their vulnerability by granting access to smart devices where they can be sexually exploited by people they know and people they don't know. And one other point I want to call out too is the number of juvenile sexual offenders. And something that I say to people pretty often is, if our country has an issue acknowledging child sexual abuse as a serious problem, we have a very serious issue acknowledging that juveniles are very capable and often are committing sexual abuse. So this chart right here, the blue line shows the prevalence of children committing abuse against children below the age of 12. And you can see that there's a sharp increase right around the age of 11 to 12, which we shouldn't be completely surprised, because the age of 11 to 12, 13 is when children enter puberty and they start having a sexual awakening. And a lot of these kids might not necessarily know what to do about it or what their personal responsibility is in terms of handling their sexual urges. There's a lack of awareness and education for children going on. And also, if adults don't realize the risk of abuse being perpetrated by juveniles, then that increases the vulnerability of enabling situations of letting older siblings watch younger siblings, things like that, that we might not realize that we have to be careful of. The one thing too, I want to just lay out, because I realize not a lot of people understand what these three concepts are. When we talk about primary prevention, and that is the focus of the Mama Bear Effect, our focus is primary prevention, and that means preventing abuse from happening in the first place. We want to take steps to minimize the risk of someone even thinking about perpetrating abuse. And that hasn't necessarily always been the focus from a societal level. Secondary prevention means getting someone to make a disclosure or discovering that sexual abuse has occurred and stop that from continuing. And then tertiary prevention is long-term response. So making sure that people who have sexual behavior problems are getting treatment, people who are victimized by sexual abuse are in therapy and getting treatment so that they can heal from that trauma. So from us as an organization, we're very much focused on primary prevention, but we'll talk a little bit more about secondary prevention. So what brings us all here today, and why I want to talk about a public health approach to child sexual abuse prevention, is because from our organization's perspective, and from those of many of our acquaintances and partners in this field, is that there is a lot of resistance in terms of effective prevention strategies. There's a lot of data out there, there's a lot of research, but when it comes to putting that into practice, it becomes very challenging. And it's not necessarily because we're doing these things and perpetrators are so savvy or these situations just cannot be prevented, but rather that the people that are involved in making these changes don't want to do it. We have strong emotional responses to this issue. We don't maybe want to admit that a perpetrator could be someone that we know. We would rather believe that that wouldn't happen in our organization or that wouldn't happen in our family. We kind of have to change our culture in terms of the way we parent people, the way we run organizations, the relationships that we have, because if we acknowledge that as much as 97% potentially of all child sexual abuse is perpetrated by someone the family knows, the child knows, then that means the people that we need to watch out for are the people that we know. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling. It's not a fun thing to be vulnerable and then to have to try to maintain relationships, but also prioritize the safety of children. And so one of the things that I've really invested a lot of my time with in our organization is studying this issue of willful blindness. And if you haven't listened to Margaret Heffernan's TED Talks, you haven't read her book, I strongly recommend that you make a note for yourself, especially the TED Talks. She has a few TED Talks that are just wonderful, because it's all about the psychology of the human brain and the things that we do to hold ourselves back, because we don't want to admit that we might be doing something that could be enabling a child to be potentially abused. Like if I'm a grandparent and I want to give my child $5 and say, keep this, it's a secret, or I want to give my grandchild hugs and kisses while they're squirming and saying no, and then I'm told, you know what, it's really not in the best interest of the child that you encourage them to keep secrets because that's something a potential predator to do. I might not like that. I might not like the uncomfortableness of having to assess my personal decisions and the way I look at things. And so, a lot of times that can hold us back from making progress. So I feel it's really important for us to embrace leaning into this discomfort, because if we're not willing to work through that discomfort, we're not going to come out of it. And that leads me to Gavin de Becker's book, Protecting the Gift, which is another great resource that I recommend and has influenced the materials that we produce and offer, because again, it's a psychological issue that we as the protectors of children have to work through. And I love this quote: only human beings can look directly at something, have all the information they need to make an accurate prediction, perhaps even momentarily make the accurate prediction, and then say it isn't so. And so many times in speaking to families and organizations where they had situations where someone's behavior tipped them off, it clicked into their intuition that something doesn't feel right. And rather than put into the work and effort of looking into it or taking steps to make sure that the safety of children was prioritized, that wasn't done. And they buried those thoughts because they would rather not deal with them. And so if we're going to be the change, if we're going to be adults that create an environment where children are safe from sexual abuse, these are the types of things that we need to be doing. So in terms of the research that we conducted 2 years ago that we put into our report that was published this January, we really wanted to dive into understanding what parents and caregivers know and understand about the issues of child sexual abuse. And the reason we did that was because parents, one, are around their children constantly. They are the number one influence of their children. They're with them from birth until they're 18 and older. So if anyone has influence over how children are raised and the things that they understand, their morals, it's parents. So the one thing that's been lacking for a number of years is the focus on parents. A lot of the work that's been done, especially in the 1980s and 90s, was focused on educating children in schools. And we're going to get into that later, but this is really a missing piece in terms of effective abuse prevention education. So, when we were conducting this study, we wanted to know, what do parents understand? Do they still believe some of the myths and misconceptions? Do they think that all abusers are strangers? Are they interested in learning about preventing sexual abuse? Is this something that they even value as something that they need to know about? And where are they getting information? Because for us as an organization, our mission is to educate parents. And one of the things that we've struggled with is how do we get this information to them? There just doesn't seem to be a conduit in which to get information to parents. And then where would they like to learn about it? Where are the ways that we can be reaching out to them to engage them with this information? So, we had a couple hypotheses about this issue. We have the belief we believe that parents are interested, but they just don't know where to get this information. And then specifically, we wanted to get more into pediatricians, because if there's anybody who has regular exposure to parents and has influence with parents, it's pediatricians. The parent, 3 days after a baby's born, parents are going to the pediatrician's office. 2 weeks later, a month later, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. Parents are constantly leaning on their pediatrician for advice on all things relating to the health and safety of their children. So we feel like this is an untapped segment of society that needs to get more involved. And we've heard, through the channels, that this has always been a challenge. Pediatricians aren't necessarily trained on any of the issues of child abuse in general. And they certainly aren't really being exposed to how to be more engaged with parents on abuse prevention issues. So, this quote right here from Hunt and Walsh and Wertel really speaks to our work, and kind of sealed the deal that we're in the right direction. Other researchers absolutely believe that the home is an essential place for children to be learning about body safety and abuse prevention. So, Natalie, I didn't step over you yet, did I? No, I still got a little ways to go, correct? Yeah. So just to kind of get into the prevalence for anyone who may not be aware, the 1998 Adverse Childhood Experience Study was the first major study that involved 17,000 participants. And of that study, 25% of women and 16% of men disclosed that they had experienced sexual abuse. And what I want to say about that specific study is that in order for them to say that, yes, they experienced child sexual abuse, the perpetrator had to be at least 5 years older than them. So that kind of canceled out a number of child-on-child sexual abuse. So that's just something I always want to call out when I reference that study. Darkness to Light had also done some recent research where they found that 1 in 10 children were affected by contact sexual abuse. And I wish I had updated this, because when I looked back at that research again, that was specific to adult perpetrated sexual abuse. If you include child-on-child sexual abuse, that number jumps up. So we're not necessarily seeing a huge decrease in child sexual abuse since the late 1990s. So we definitely have some work to be done. In the past, the estimated numbers of juvenile sexual perpetrators was around 40%. In the most recent 2020 study done by Finkelhor, it was up to 70 to 77% of children that were experiencing sexual abuse were experiencing it by one of their peers or a sibling or someone that was older or stronger or more developed than them. Of course, as we said, over 90% of perpetrators are people known to their child. That's not something that's really changing. And unfortunately, we're seeing major increased rates of online exploitation. I just pulled these numbers yesterday, second quarter of 2023. So just in a 3-month period, Facebook and Instagram sent 3.7 million reports of exploitation on their sites. It's insane. And it's mind-boggling that these organizations cannot do more to prevent this content from being uploaded onto their platforms. Overall, child sexual abuse contributes 0.6% to what they estimate of the global burden of disease. So all the things that impact people's health, child sexual abuse absolutely plays a role. And the burden financially on our society of child sexual abuse is in the billions. Every time that a child experiences sexual abuse and then they need services, they need mental health care, they lose productivity, all of these things pay a cost. And so when people think that child sexual abuse is something that doesn't impact them, it impacts us all over the place, everywhere. It impacts our health insurance costs. It impacts the safety and security of our neighborhoods and our communities. Everybody, and not only just the child, but the people in the family suffer. Oftentimes it breaks apart a family. It increases need for public services to support those families. And it also affects people's ability to trust organizations, the school system, the churches. It increases anxiety for parents. This is just another thing that parents oftentimes are kind of forgotten in the conversation on the issues of child sexual abuse. But these parents oftentimes need services themselves because they feel like they failed their child. If they were a previous victim of abuse, they doubly feel like they failed their child because they wanted to protect them from sexual abuse. There's just so many rippling effects of what happens when child sexual abuse occurs that we should all want to be part of the solution so this doesn't happen in the first place. When we look at, the impact on the human body, the ACE study was such a wonderful thing because it took what people were calling a bad memory, that child sexual abuse was just a bad memory. No, it's a biological wound. It changes your brain structure. It changes the chemistry in your body. It affects your mental health, but you're also more likely to have, cancer, diabetes, immune diseases. All these things are impacted by the toxic stress that our body will carry if we're not able to heal from that trauma and that adversity. So it's just, there's so much data and research on why we need to be addressing the issues of childhood trauma in general and childhood adversity, that there's so many ways that we can be improving and supporting families to be minimizing the long-lasting impacts. And I'm sure many of you saw or heard of the movie Sound of Freedom, and we have some mixed feedback from people about that film. But so just to kind of tie in the issues of sex trafficking, there are a lot of organizations where their primary focus is sex trafficking. But what we want people to realize is that the vast majority of children who are involved or fall into sex trafficking previously experienced child sexual abuse. There's absolutely a correlation between children having trauma and adversity in their childhood and falling into trafficking, whether it's having abusive parents or loss of a parent. A lot of children who are sex trafficked are former foster children that run away from home. So to address the issues of being able to provide children with a safe, nurturing environment during their childhood has so many benefits that to ignore this is just, it's just such a loss for society as a whole. But and then on another perspective, when we look at the prosecution of child abuse cases, we know, I'm sure many of you know, that most of them will never even go to trial. And if they do go to trial, you're talking about a very small percentage. I mean, in this one, known outcome cases starts with 453. Only, 14 of them resulted in a trial. Some of them resulted in a guilty admission. But for the most part, most cases are not even being reported to authorities. So the prosecution rates here represent a very small percentage of the whole of cases. Most of them are never even going to trial. So when we see stories in the news coming out about a case, that is just one in a 1,000, most likely, or more, that actually exist. And I wish that every media outlet, when they talk about these cases of people being charged or going to trial, being convicted, that they would please share resources with families so they can learn about this issue, because it continues the mentality of that won't happen in my family because we're a loving family and this and that. No, we're all vulnerable to child sexual abuse. So, just to kind of sum it up, there's no real widespread method of abuse prevention education. And we found this in our research as well, but parents really don't have access to education. There absolutely is resistance from youth serving organizations and schools to really adopt abuse prevention practices. So many times when we or other advocates will ask, what are you doing to help keep children safe in your organization? It's, well, we do background checks, or, and it's very minimal. And there's so many great things that they can be doing. Safekidsthrive.org is one organization that we recommend. Their website has a lot of great tools and resources to organizations to help them understand what are the areas where there's risk. What can we be doing to improve safety in our organization? Because if we're not addressing it, it's just becoming a risk. I think I shared a post on Instagram just this morning. There was a $2 million settlement in a school system in California because a teacher got pregnant by a child that she was raping. And people in the school system knew the teacher was having an inappropriate relationship with the child and chose to do nothing about it. And so when these things happen, now you have a $2 million settlement. That $2 million comes out of taxpayer money. So people are paying the price for what organizations are not doing to protect children. We continue to be reactive rather than preventive. And I'm sure, if you're in the field of child sexual abuse prevention, listening to this, if something happens in your community, that's when people reach out and say, I want to learn about this. And it's like, no, we want to learn about this all the time, not just when something terrible happens in our town. So when we talk about taking a public health approach, and what happens, and I've seen it, we have this experience where a lot of people are working in various fields, whether it's research, child abuse pediatricians, trauma therapists. All these people have wonderful resources and information and perspectives, but so often everyone stays in their lane. And if we would all talk to one another, it would be amazing what we could do to support one another, especially in terms of prevention. So we've had, conversations with child abuse pediatricians or conferences that specifically focus on responding to child sexual abuse. And there's so little that they're actually promoting about preventing child sexual abuse. But if you take these child abuse pediatricians that see these cases, put them in a media case and say, this is what these children are experiencing. These are the factors that we see children are coming in that have experienced abuse. That real life experience can encourage people to want to learn more. And so I feel there really needs to be more collaboration, more adoption of strategies as a whole to address this issue. We can't keep treating it child abuse prevention in one lane, child abuse pediatricians, research. We all need to be supporting each other and collaborating so we can work towards the main goal should always be prevention. We don't want to keep children experiencing this abuse. Every child abuse pediatrician should want to be put out of practice because we've done such an amazing job to protect children. And I think sometimes we all get so focused in our lane that we forget that the overall goal should be we want to help keep children safe. So I'm going to let Natalie dive into the research report that we did that kind of gave us a lot of great information on how organizations can be helping empower and educate their communities to protect children through education of parents. So Natalie, let me know if you have any issues sharing your screen.
Okay, here we go. And while I'm sharing the results from our study, please pop in the chat. And if you have any questions about where we got this data, or if you have any questions on anything, just please pop in the chat and we can answer that either at the end or Adrian can answer it as we're talking. So this is the title of our report. It's the Parental and Caregiver Perspectives on Child Sexual Abuse Prevention. I put a link in the chat where you can go access the electronic version on your own if you want to read it later. And Adrian already touched on this. So the reason why we wanted our participants to be parents is because they should be and are the primary people in their children's life, and they have so many opportunities to be preventing the abuse from happening within the home. So that brings me to the methods of our study. A couple of years ago, we sent out a survey. In fact, some of you may have seen it or even taken it yourself. We had about 586 complete surveys. And all of our participants, we required them to be parents. And so with the results that we received, and I'll jump in a little bit later as to what kind of things we asked, but we ran tests, and specifically we ran chi-square tests, and we did find some significant findings that I'll share in just a moment. So we had a couple research questions, and the first was, are parents motivated to learn? And so we asked a couple questions regarding this, and we found that 77% of them did indicate that child sexual abuse prevention is very important to them. And we asked them, what are your motivations? And they told us their own experiences with child sexual abuse or the knowledge that they have gained through the media or through the news. And these were their main motivations for wanting to learn about this topic more. We asked our participants, how much time do you spend in educating yourselves on child sexual abuse prevention? And as you can see here, we had a significant amount of them are spending time on a regular basis. We have 63%. And, you know, it is important to note that a lot of our followers and a lot of the people who may have taken this may be advocates in the field. So this could be why we have 63% spending time on a regular basis. But this was, you know, comforting to us. This is good to see. And so we were curious, well, where are you learning about this? Where are you going to study or, you know, understand this topic a little bit more? And, you know, we gave them multiple options and they could pick multiple options as well. As you can see, most of them picked websites and social media, about 80%. And while this is comforting to us, I think this is great. The internet can be used in a lot of good ways. We can agree on that. However, not all information on the internet is correct. And so while it's great that we have 80% going to the internet, we just need to make sure that there are that they are looking at, you know, accurate information. And there's a lot of great websites out there. And we just need to make sure, as we are advocates in the field, pointing them to the correct places to be looking at information. I think it's important to note that you can see at pediatric resources, only 10% were receiving resources from their pediatrician, and only 2% were receiving resources from their midwife or obstetrician. And, you know, Adrian and I were talking about this earlier. If we could have every OBGYN or midwife giving information to new moms, I would love to see how wonderful that would be. Because as a new mom, if I could get training, you know, on an important topic such as this, I think it could go a long way. So, I mean, this is something that we think we should explore later, is this idea of midwives and OBGYNs giving out information as well. So our second question was, what do parents understand? So we asked them a variety of questions about the nuances of child sexual abuse and its prevalence. And overall, our parents did provide pretty correct responses coinciding with current research. So that was good. We asked them, if you were, like when you were younger, if you received body safety education, what kind of messages were you receiving? And you can see them in order here from top to low, high to low. And most of them, almost 80%, were receiving the message that, you know, what parts of your body were private. So this is good. It's important to be teaching, you know, which parts of our body are private. Many of you who work at CACs understand that a lot of children that come in not always are referring to their body parts in, you know, the correct ways. And it's important that we are teaching them the correct terminology. So this was good. However, it was concerning to us that, you know, the lowest amount of them were saying that when they were little, they received the message that sexual abuse may be perpetrated by a known person. And as we know today, almost, you know, 90% or more of sexual abusers or perpetrators are people known to the children and to the children's family. And so this, you know, this just needs to be a better message today, that we are not necessarily needing to be teaching stranger danger anymore. We need to be teaching that this can be happening at the hands of somebody that we know. So I'm going to kind of translate this graph for us because it's a little confusing if you look at it. We asked our participants, if, you know, did you receive body safety education within the home when you were a child? But we also asked them, did you receive education outside the home? So that could be a doctor's office or a church or a school. And we wanted to just look at how many were receiving of what, where were they learning things when they were little, when they were children. And so as you can see in the green, these are the people that received education outside the home. And we found that those that received education outside the home were more likely to also receive it within the home. And that just shows us that parents will be teaching more about body safety education within the home. if they're being influenced and motivated by external factors. So for example, if a teacher teaches a body safety lesson at school, I think it'd be great if they're also sending home materials for parents to read with the hope that they will also be teaching somewhat similar messages within the home. And the same could be said for a doctor's office. I think it'd be wonderful if every pediatrician sent home information about child sexual prevention and how to teach it to your children. So I think this is important to note, is that parents can be influenced by external factors. They can be motivated by doctors and teachers if they're sending home resources with their children. We asked our participants, how often do you think perpetrators are people known to the child? And we are seeing here that today, lots of people do understand as of today that most often the perpetrator is going to be somebody known to the child. They maybe didn't receive that education as a child, as we saw in the earlier results, but they know it today. So that is good. We asked our parents, where do you think children should be receiving body safety education? I think it's important to get parents' perspective on this. And the top 3 results was home, school, and doctor's offices. This was so big for us. We really truly believe that doctors they hold such an important role in a child's life and in the child's parent's life. And we'll dive more into this in a little bit, but if we can be having them talking more about this topic, or at least sending home materials, I think that could be so influential. And the same can be said, for every other thing on here, such as childcare or church or youth groups. So this kind of is leading us into our discussion on the idea of pediatricians also holding a role in preventing abuse. We asked our parents, what do you think about this idea of pediatricians promoting abuse prevention? And as you can see here, about 91.5% either somewhat agreed or strongly agreed that they want their pediatricians to be promoting prevention awareness messages. And like Adrienne touched on, pediatricians, when they're in their residency programs, they actually don't receive a lot of training on sexual abuse. So we're not trying to necessarily berate them or say that they're not doing their job, but our goal is to instead support them and encourage them. And I understand that they haven't received a lot of education on this topic. So that's what we're trying to do as an organization, is give them the resources needed to get started on talking about this topic. So I'm going to share some of our chi-square test results. For those who don't know what a chi-square test is, it's a test, it's a statistical test where we compare 2 categorical variables. So a categorical variable, an example of that would be race or age or sex or gender. That's a categorical variable. So with these chi-square tests, we compared those 2 types of categorical variables, and we received like a p-value. I'm not going to jump more into that because that can get confusing, but if we received a p-value that is less than 0.05, that indicates a significant relationship. It's important to note that even though it indicates there's a significant relationship, it doesn't say the direction of the relationship. So we can't say which variable is affecting the other, but we can at least tell that there is some significance between 2 variables. So we'll just share a couple of our findings. One of them was, we found a significant relationship between gender and confidence level. And I think this is important to note. What I mean by this is we compared gender and the participants' confidence level in protecting children from sexual abuse. Like I said, we can't exactly tell which gender is more confident than the other. We may be able to hypothesize based off of the mean values, but it's important to note that some genders are more confident than the other. And so we need to understand as a society, how can we empower everybody to feel confident enough to protect children from sexual abuse? We asked mothers and fathers, how much time do you spend in preventing sexual abuse, or how much time do you spend in learning about sexual abuse, sorry. And as you can see, mothers are in the dark blue and fathers are in the green. And if you look at the far right, we add those who indicated that they spend time on a regular basis. We have almost double the amount of mothers. So we have 70%, almost 70% of mothers are spending time on a regular basis compared to I believe it's 34% of fathers. Now, this is interesting, but it gets more interesting with our next graph. So then we ask them a follow-up question. What is your confidence level in protecting children from sexual abuse? Fathers are in the darker orange and mothers are like in the yellow. If you look at very confident on the far right, we're seeing kind of a flip-flop. More fathers are very confident in protecting their children from sexual abuse. And, I think there's a lot of hypotheses that we can throw out there. So if you want to put them in the chat, you can. There's a disparity here, of course. One of our hypotheses was, as a society, we're getting better, but for sure in the past, society kind of influenced or reinforced this idea that it's in the mother's role to prevent sexual abuse. And I wonder if, some fathers are still feeling that today, is maybe they don't want to put as much time into educating themselves, but yet they still feel confident. We can't say for certain, there needs to be more research done, but we would love to hear your thoughts as well. So you can put those in the chat. We asked our participants, what is your confidence in other people's understanding of sexual abuse? And this is important. We depend on daycares and schools and coaches and other organizations to take care of our children and keep them safe. So we wanted to know, what is your confidence in other people? And it kind of, as you can see from the numbers here, it goes up and down. I don't know if parents are entirely confident. We see 31% are somewhat confident, but I would love to see more that are saying they're very confident in their family and friends' understanding of this topic. One of our findings, our third one, was we ran a chi-square test to analyze the relationship between whether or not someone received body safety education as a child and their rate of disclosure time if they were abused. And we did not find a significant finding, meaning there's not a significant relationship here, at least in this sample group that we have. So what this means is that even if a child receives all the body safety education in the world, they still need a loving atmosphere within their home where they feel safe to disclose the sexual abuse. Now, this isn't to say that we don't need to put as much emphasis into body safety education. We still need to do that, but we also need to be teaching our parents and our teachers and other people who spend time with children that there needs to be a loving, open atmosphere where children feel safe asking questions and feel safe disclosing their own abuse or maybe even their friends' abuse. So I'm just going to run through other important findings, and I'll just maybe hit on a couple because we're running out of time. I'm just going to go through here. How about that? Adrian, I hope that's okay with you.
You're the boss.
Let's see. We asked people, if you disclose your abuse to somebody, what was the reaction of the person you disclosed to? I think it's sad to see that 93% of them that disclosed received negative reactions. We need to do better, right? We need to be teaching our parents and ourselves to be ready to receive disclosure and how to react to the person who discloses. And then I'll end on this note and hand it off to Adrian. We asked them, what is your satisfaction to the reaction of the person they disclosed to? And as you can see, we had about 44% that were either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied, and only 28% that were satisfied or very satisfied. I think, like I said before, we need to do better, and we need to teach our parents to do better as well, because we want our survivors to feel more satisfied with the disclosures that they give and the reactions they receive. So I'll hand it off to you, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. Yeah, I mean, I think the results of our research were very telling, and there's a lot of powerful information in there that can be used for advocacy work. If you are looking to apply for funding or want to do a presentation, this is some really important information to be sharing with the medical community, with police departments and things like that. It's clear that adult awareness and education is essential, because on one hand, we not only need to be educating children so that they can know their rights and protections, adults also have to have the ability to encourage disclosures like Natalie was talking about. So, in conclusion, the main points that we really want people to take away is there continues to be insufficient access to education for parents and caregivers. They're asking for it, they're looking for it. There's no real main conduits of how to provide information to them. It's not really being addressed as a whole, as a public health issue. And I say this all the time when I look at COVID. And when COVID happened, there were signs everywhere telling people to wash their hands, to mask up, to do all these things. We need signage like that. In places where children are, child sexual abuse prevention education needs to be prioritized. The awareness, the funding for awareness is just inadequate. It's insufficient. And of course, adults need the support and the training so they can do the best that they can for their children. Otherwise, all these misconceptions and the lack of information is going to affect them. But it's like from a biological standpoint, we know that adverse childhood experiences have major negative health outcomes for children, and we all pay the price for this. It all impacts us. It impacts the people that we love. It impacts the people that we work with, the people that we employ. All those relationships are impacted by adversity. And if you haven't watched Nadine Burke Harris's TED Talk on ACEs, you absolutely have to, because she pretty much came to the same conclusion that doctors and pediatricians and the whole world needs to be banging a drum for childhood trauma and adversity. And she was so passionate, thinking once they find out the science of how much adversity affects the biology of children and their health, that people are going to jump on board with this. And they didn't, because there still is that psychological component that holds people back. And so, specific to our work, what we came out with is pediatric kits that we are currently in this year, in great support of grant funding that we received. We're donating them this year to pediatric centers that do primary care treatment for children, because we want to help them incorporate abuse prevention into their anticipatory guidance, the conversations they have with families. Your child's 2 now. Are you talking to them about proper names for the genitals? Are you promoting a little bit of privacy in your family when people are using the bathroom? Things like that. Giving parents simply the opportunity to read information so they can learn about this issue. And like Natalie said, doctors do not need to be the experts, but they can absolutely be advocates. And so in our pediatric kit, we have put together a combination of all the resources, or a lot of the resources that we offer. Our board books to be put into exam rooms, grade school, day 1, adolescent years, RAT cards that can go in waiting rooms, our research report posters that can go in the room. We also co-wrote a best practices guide with Dr. Finkel of the CARES Institute in New Jersey. And if you are a CAC or you're in the field where you can advocate within your community, please help us make your community aware of these resources so that they can use them and put them into practice and help protect the children in your communities. But overall, this is a movement. It's not just pediatricians. We all need to be collaborating. Parents also want the police departments talking about it, which there's a lot of findings in our research report we weren't able to share today. But all these organizations, having survivors come out and do presentations to health departments, to religious organizations, to police departments, engaging everyone, especially the media, reaching out to the media when they are having these reports. CACs and in child, protection agencies should be at the forefront so that you can continue to share your voice and your perspective about the issues. And of course, all these grassroots awareness efforts. There are so many families and survivors that reach out to us that want to take an issue, they want to get involved. And all the time we tell them, let's find your local CAC, let's find your local organizations. But so if you are part of an organization and you're interested about promoting the pediatric kits in your community and you want some sample kits to share, we have a link on our website that has some videos from Dr. Finkel, but you can also email Natalie to learn about it. And so I also had said to everyone that we would be sharing a link for it. It's a short survey that we have. That's the link that's going to take you so that you can fill it out, give us your email, and we'll provide you with a code that will give you $20 off of educational materials from our e-commerce platform, and that's including free shipping as well. That's our thank you for attending the webinar. We're really excited that there were 35 people here. That's a really great turnout for something like this. So we really hope you'll take the opportunity to use those resources. If you want to order them for yourself so you can educate yourself or your family, you want to share them with colleagues, you want to present them to your local youth serving organization, your daycare, things like that. That's really what the purpose of our organization is. We want to be a conduit of information. We want to support people who are working in the field and want to make a difference. And so our educational materials are, used across the country and are translated into a number of languages because people are looking for these resources. So we have a couple minutes left, but if anybody has any questions at all, please feel free to put it into the chat. We're happy to answer any questions. The research report is available on our website as well, so you can download that and read more about it. But we also are donating copies of the research report. So if you want them to, you're doing a presentation with anybody, we will donate copies of the research report to give out as a handout, because like I said, having this information in hand is really powerful when you're talking to people. And really we're convincing people how important this issue is, because so often it's just not getting the awareness it has. And we are also donating copies of the pediatric best practices guide. So if you want some copies of those, you're more than welcome to order extra copies with your order, so that you can give them out to your doctor or different organizations, your health department. But so definitely use that Google form link in the chat. The code is only good through Friday. So we want to make sure that only people who attended the conference or this webinar are using it. So please make sure you take that link. And if you missed it, please email me and I'll make sure to send it to you. But if there's not any questions, we'll just say, thank you so much for taking the time and spending an hour here with us today to learn about this. I hope you found some, interesting information that you can use in your advocacy work, and also, are inspired to take some actionable steps to improve child protection in your community. So thank you guys so much. And if you're ever interested in having us do a presentation for another group or something like that, we're more than happy to. So please just reach out. Thank you.
Thank you.